Okay, so last time you told us the inspiration behind 612 and what the thought process of that idea was. But how did it go from an idea to you executing it?
Yes, so we took about 6 months to create a range which was there in the mind and translating it into actual garments. It is tough to create a range right from at the beginning because you have to put a lot of elements together. So I think the first 6 months were basically to getting the some few people that could help us building that small infrastructure, about 10 machines and, a designer, the because the garment manufacturing involves, cutting master and a tailoring setup. So we created that. So I think we took about 6 months to really get our act in place.
And in this time period, I mean, what happened to the yarn business? What was the goal with that?
So when this business started taking shape, this was about 2 years later, we exited the yarn business. We were able to sell it off to another business. So we decided to kind of completely focus our energy on this business.
And what were the learning curves of starting 612? I mean, after the first 6 months or during those 6 months, what were the things that you were kind of struggling with and figuring out?
So if you see, from yarn, which was a commodity business, this was a branded apparel business. So there were two sides to it. One was, of course, the manufacturing, the getting the garment in place. So the garment manufacturing, again, it was new to us. So it was learning how to actually create garment, how to create a setup for a garment manufacturer. And of course, on the other side was the retailing part of it, where how it has to be retailed through the modern retail or which channel to be used and how we have to engage with the consumers. So on both sides.
And how did the business look in the early stages? I mean, as you were figuring things out, what were the steps that you were taking?
So we were, the moment we were able to create a range, we started interacting with a lot of retailers because that's how we will have to, we had to sell the garment because at that time online had not yet started, because I'm talking about 2010, 2009 and 10, and online retail was not there. So it was all physical retail. So we started approaching these retail groups and individual retailers, showed them the range. Faced a lot of rejection in the beginning because typically there is not much openness to try new things, and we were trying to bring in new things. So yes, but we did persist with it, and yeah.
And what made you persist through these rejections? I mean, what made you keep believing in the idea? And then did you also have this kind of fail-safe timeline of like, if this doesn't work in 6 months, if we don't get a yes in a year, then we would quit?
So sure, again, so I think we were quite confident about the range which we were able to create, translated from our mind, because we had done a lot of, focused interviews at our end, talking directly to consumers who were the end users, and they really, liked the product and they had good feedback to give on that. So eventually it was a question of convincing the retailers that this is the right product which is required in the market. So we persisted with it, and finally were able to break through with one of the largest and the most popular chain at that time, Shoppers Stop.
Okay, so this is around 2013 when things kind of started looking up. Was 612 gaining a lot of traction at this point, and I know that there was, and it was evident with the number of stores and the revenue and the recognition you were getting. So how did that feel?
Well, so the struggle was more in 2009 and 10, and by 2013, which you mentioned, things had kind of stabilized. We had a sizable business, upwards of around 25 crores, which was pretty big in retail at that point of time. We had started to build up a lot of presence across the country in all the 4 regions. So the one thing which really at that point of time was that one was that we felt validated for taking this step, which was a major step of pivoting from an existing business to a new business. And of course, it was exciting because we had started to kind of build up again on a concept, and we had again come to a phase where we could look at growth and scaling up.
And when did you realize that in order to grow, you would need external resources, and how did you kind of plan to attain them?
So yeah, so initially we had kind of bootstrapped, so we had put in our own money into the venture. We had taken some working capital loan facilities from the banks as well to reach the stage of 2013. But here, because when we were looking at much larger growth, we did start looking at external modes of finance, and we actually came down to private equity. We thought would be the right funding mode at that point of time.
And why did you think private equity would be the right decision? Why not private credit or another loan from the bank? What made private equity the right choice?
Yeah, so I think one is of course the stage of the business that you are in. So we were entering what we would classify it as a growth phase, and a retail based business is actually requires a lot of capital on the front end side of the business, which is basically to create inventory, to create a retail setup, to create engagement with the consumers, and that kind of a business. We thought that private equity funding would be the right mode at that point of time, instead of loans, which add to the burden. And because again, as you are growing into new stores and new territories and new regions, the cash flows do get affected. Right.
And at this point, you hadn't given up any equity at all. So this would be the first point.
Yeah. So this would, so far it was completely controlled by us, and then when we decided to take private equity, that was the time when we diluted.
And what was the process of getting private equity? I mean, did you know how to go into it? Was there a lot more rejection, and did you find the right investors quickly? What did that look like?
So yes, so we did go through a investment banker, but a freelance investment banker, not like an institutional investment bankers, because we were new and to this whole field of raising money through private equity. And so yes, we did meet a few of the prospective private equity players. And yes, it was not so easy. I think we spent about 6 to 8 months before we came across 2 term sheets, which we got from 2 different set of investors. Yes, so it did take a while before we could reach that stage.
You said there were 2 term sheets, which means that 2 different investors were trying to get on board. So what were the distinctions between them, and
so there were 2. Yes. So there were 2 very, very distinct set of investors. One was a legacy private equity investors who gave us a certain, who were offering a certain check size with certain conditions, and the other one was a newly found private equity fund who was offering twice the check size that the first one was offering, with more liberal conditions. So these were the 2 options that we had at that point of time.
And were they asking for the same amount of share of the business?
No, the dilution was more with the higher check size, but it was not proportionately higher. Okay. It was still better off in terms of the amount of money that they were offering.
And so which one did you end up choosing?
So what would you have chosen at that point of time?
I mean, I think for anyone, more money sounds appealing, especially, I'm assuming, in a growth stage business, when you're not afraid to give up equity at that point. Or maybe you should be, but is that what you did?
That's exactly what we did, but I must mention here, so at that point of time, because we were looking at this space as providing a lot of opportunity, because a couple of popular brands were struggling, and they had gone, they had some issues due to which they were not able to grow further. So we found that there's a lot of white space available for us to grow, and so we had made very aggressive plans. And in that strategy, the bigger check size really came into, appeared to be more useful. However, in any growth phase, you do come across situations where you need sectoral experience, you need investor experience. It's very important that the investor is also aligned with you in terms of your strategic goals, in terms of the tactics, even at the operational level. How do you want to carry forward business? So I think it's an important decision. The money is one dimension, but you need to take other factors also into account.
Okay, so you got the 50 crore investment, and after, what was that money kind of used for? And then, like you said, the role of the investor is important. So what was the role of the investor in your case?
Yes, so here I would say that of course the money came in. We primarily used it to scale up our, our retail presence. So from almost about 60 to 70 point of sales, we actually were able to scale it up to 500 point of sales. And in 7 years, we actually became the second largest Indian kidswear brand. So we were really able to implement our plans very aggressively. However, um, as retail, as modern retail was developing, when I say modern retail, I meant the department store formats were really growing, and we had aligned with them. But the other big development which was taking place was also online retail. So in 2013-14, we could, Flipkart had started coming in, then Myntra was launched, and then Jabong was there. So a lot of online development, and that is where I started feeling that an investor who comes in with some form of exposure and experience and understanding of the new developments which are taking place in any industry segment will always be more useful, because that's where I think we found that there was a discrepancy in the alignment of ideas between the investors that we had chosen and what we were seeing panning out in the industry at that point of time.
So you felt that there was something missing because you didn't really have a strategic partner? I mean, you felt that you were at a disadvantage of sorts?
So I think there was, I must say that here an entrepreneur or the management team will obviously like to take decisions based on the best interests of the company. But the investor should be able to question and play the devil's advocate. I think there has to be a forum where all your decisions need to be questioned, and that's where you can maybe some of the aspects which you are overlooking, or some of the focus that needs to be there, and the vision that you have. I think that's where the investor expertise comes into picture, and in our case, we did start feeling at that point of time that maybe someone which had an investors who had a little more understanding of how this retail would now pan out, especially given the fact that there is online and offline together, would have probably helped us much more.
Great. I think there's so much more to unpack with the e-commerce and innovation that was there in 612, because there was a lot, I'm sure there was a lot of trial and error, but we can do that in the next episode.